Name is Michelle Lau, and I'm going to record this webinar so that we can post it and make available for others who will find the content interesting. I am the program manager of mathematics at Alameda County Office of Education, who is co-hosting this Hour of Code event for our county along with Contra Costa County Office of Education. And we're just excited to be here today to really kind of lift up and bring some awareness around the different dimensions of coding and computer science. And I'm happy to be here with my colleague, Ben, who I'll give some time for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, just really quickly, Ben Sanders, also at the Alameda County Office of Education. I work with Michelle and a bunch of other folks in different content areas. So we've been really excited to support this program, and it's been off to a great start. And we're really glad to have Simone and hopefully a couple of other folks who will join us momentarily talk about their really exciting journeys in this adventure they're on in the world of computer science. So we're really excited to hear about that, and appreciate Simone you making time. I will say, for the course, for the good of the order, that Simone and I are old friends. We have roots here in the little city of Albany, and so it's really fun for me to reconnect. It's been a while since I've seen Simone, but known each other for a long time. So really happy to have him here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I guess I can give a short bio too. Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, I'm in my early career in software development. I work at YouTube on the YouTube web architecture team. I can explain more what that means later. But yeah, I've been into computer science for a long time now. I took like the classes in high school. Did lots of coding on my free time. Something I've been passionate about for quite a while now. And yeah, I graduated from UCLA like a year and a half ago with a degree in computer science. I'm sure I'll talk more about my experiences later.
We have lots of questions for you to just kind of, understand how your process has been, and hopefully inspire other people, who are interested in pursuing future studies and also future career opportunities, around computer science. So before we get started, I do want to say that this is a webinar format. And so those of you who are in the room who have questions, feel free to utilize the Q&A box. And then we are going to pull out those questions and present them to Simone and whoever else can attend our session today. And hopefully try to get our, do our best shot at, presenting the questions so that it can be answered. So feel free to post a question in the Q&A box at any time. All right. So Simone, let's just go ahead and get started. The first thing is can you share a little bit about your journey, about how you knew you wanted to go into computer programming?
Definitely. I think, for the longest time, when people asked me as a kid, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I just had no idea. I kind of was into science. Like, my mom was a scientist, so I thought that was super cool. So I was like, I want to be a scientist, but I still don't really know entirely what that means. But as I sort of got older in high school, I took a beginner CS course my freshman year, and I really liked it. My teacher was really good. His name was Mr. Morris. He was a great teacher. And that sort of maybe started kind of kindling that spark, I guess. And I sort of explored some outside of class. I did some online lessons. I know there's such a wealth of information online about how to code, which is really, really useful. Some popular websites are like one that I remember using was called Code Academy. I used that a lot when I first got started. And, I took AP computer science. I took the next year, my sophomore year. And I think that's when I even got more into it, which we learned a programming language called Java. And that's when I sort of was like, okay, I started to learn Java. I knew Android apps are made in Java. So I started kind of messing around making Android apps outside of class. Nothing, at first it was nothing cool. My very first thing was like just some text on the screen. I was like, wow, I got text on the screen, right? But that's how you start. And then from there, you make it more and more complicated and just watching YouTube tutorials. And I realized this is something I could do. It's something I can study in college. So I applied for computer science at pretty much every school that I applied to and decided with UCLA. I can talk more about like internships and stuff too,
Yeah,
if
I
you want.
mean, it's just really interesting that for the longest time you mentioned that you didn't have any like piqued interest, like, oh, when I grow up, I want to be, a computer scientist or a computer
Mhm.
programmer. But it was a class, it seemed like that was kind of a pivotal point that really piqued your interest. And then that also encouraged you to do a lot of individual online learning.
Mhm.
What are
Yeah.
some recommendations that you have for our students in the room today? If they're somewhat curious, have no idea, or resources that they can tap into to learn more about STEM fields,
Yeah,
particularly.
I would say, Simone, the YouTube stuff in particular, I'll just say it's just so remarkable to me as a person also who just generally, when I need to try to figure something out, I will not infrequently go look for a really good YouTube tutorial. I mean, there's just incredible information. And of course, you got to filter through it and figure out what you're really looking for because there's an awful lot out there. So on that note, and maybe that's Michelle's point, what even on the YouTube front, like, is there a group of programming stuff that you would recommend people look at if they want to look at some solid tutorials? What do you recommend?
Um, off the top of my head, I'm not sure. It kind of depends. Like, are you more interested in web development? Or are you more interested in, back end development? There's a kind of different courses, like places you could focus on. But so I don't want to recommend anything like off the top of my head, but I would say that I remember using the website Code Academy a lot when I first got started, like 8 years ago or whatever. I'm pretty sure it's still very popular and very, very good. So I would say that's a great place to start. And maybe I can drop links later to some
Yeah,
other
no,
good
no
resources.
worries.
And feel free to send them my way. We're hoping to put together kind of like an end of our Code Week resource for our attendees. So if they want to learn more or peruse more or explore more, they have those resources on hand. I'm going to pause for a second because we got Davis in the house. Thanks for finally being able to get on with the Zoom link. We're so happy to see you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. My technology is not my friend today.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the reality. I call it humbling moments, it just
Yeah.
keeps me real. But we kind of started a little bit of just doing some
Okay.
infos on where our work is. So I don't know if you want to take a moment to just introduce
Yeah.
yourself, say something about what you do.
Yeah. So, hello, my name is Davis Reynagera. I am a second year PhD student at Boston University, and I am a neurobiologist. And so I think one of the reasons I kind of wanted to join this is because coding is quickly becoming kind of ubiquitous. Everyone needs to know how to code, especially in the sciences. Um, and you don't really like the infrastructure for teaching people how to code uh, is not as good as it could be. In colleges, I think everyone encourages you to learn how to code, but you don't really get an idea of why that's so significant. And I think, as you start to venture into the realm of science and even business, and anytime you're having to use math and kind of deal with data sets and deal with information kind of on a large scale, coding is an invaluable skill. You have to know how to take all these numbers and interpret them, and coding is the best way to do that. And I'm still learning myself. I'm certainly not coming to you as a coding expert, more as somebody who spent their whole life thinking they were going to do only biology, and they were just going to mess with mice and learn about the brain, and all of a sudden they have to learn Python or MATLAB. So I mean, and self-learning is really, one of the most powerful ways to go about it. So MATLAB, I'm sorry if I'm repeating things that have already been said a million times, but MATLAB has some great tutorials online. They're free if you have like institutional access to MATLAB, which you will at like any school, any college, and I think maybe even some high schools will offer you that. And Python. So MATLAB and Python are the ones I use the most. Of course, I'm really just speaking as like a biologist. I know those are the two big ones, but the ability to process data using MATLAB and Python, the ability to understand exactly what it is you're doing with the code, is going to save you tons and tons and tons of time. I mean, this is all stuff that people used to need, pencils and paper for, and as I think a lot of you know, now you have to have a computer to do really anything. And that's reflected by the fact that every high school, I think, or not every high school, but a lot of high schools now, they provide their students with pretty constant access to computers. And I would encourage you to capitalize on that. Learn how the computer works. Learn how, I'm learning how Arduino works. It's like this little circuit board thing that I apparently need to know how to engineer. And now I'm putting wires together and all that. It comes at you quickly, and it's really, really fun. And it makes you feel like you have a lot of ability to kind of affect change in the world, especially if you're doing any kind of research and you have a question you want to answer. 90% of the time, you're going to have to code, or you're going to have to do something to automate that process so that you don't spend, years sitting there counting, how many times a mouse poked his nose into a thing. I mean, we're entering like an unprecedented time in biology, especially, but just in like the ability of computers to make our lives substantially easier. So I don't know if I have any specific advice on how to learn how to code, besides just to say, you just have to do it, and you just have to be confused, and kind of treat being confused as a badge of honor, because it means you're tackling the concepts you need to tackle, and eventually you'll look back and realize you kind of knew what you were doing all along. I don't know if there's anything else you kind of want me to touch on.
Michelle, I know you probably have a ton of thoughts. I just, right off the top of my head, Davis, thanks so much for coming today.
Yeah, of course.
I can't help but just immediately note the sort of, and I'll borrow a little bit of a cliche, and no, with all due respect to our colleagues in the actual math community, the age-old question, when am I going to need to use this? It feels like what you're saying is, in your field and probably a lot of others, people actually need to know how to code, even if they weren't thinking they were going to be a computer scientist. So that is kind of an important point, really, as far as why people might want to know how to code. So thank you for sharing that basic point. Michelle?
Yeah, I was going to also encourage that, we can have a conversation amongst this panel. So it doesn't have to be a question that we generate, but if, Simone has a question for Davis and vice versa, we can definitely have, conversation openly as a group. But Simone, you mentioned that you are currently at YouTube, which is, I think, for a lot of kids, a very tangible dream that they want to achieve. Can you talk about how you got to YouTube, and then also what you do specifically there to support YouTube?
Yeah, for sure. So, it started with really, I got my first internship, between my summer of freshman year and sophomore year of college. And I can talk more about like how I got that, at some point, but that was at a company called Qualcomm, which is actually a hardware company, but as Ben was saying, there's every company is going to need some amount of coding to some degree, right? So that was my first internship, and then the next year I got an internship at Google. It was their freshman sophomore program, so like you're only eligible your first couple of years, and from there I kind of just kept going back to Google. So I got one more internship at Google, and now I'm full-time. Yeah, because Google owns YouTube, so I ended up on a YouTube team, but it's still technically part of Google. And then what I do, it can be hard to explain sometimes, but my team is called the YouTube Web Architecture Team. And what that is basically, I work on the YouTube website, trying to make it as good as possible, but also I do a lot of like supporting other teams, making sure that the teams that are making like new features, new changes to the website can do it like as fast as possible and as smooth as possible. And yeah, so I'm kind of working in the background, like making subtle improvements and not really making these big changes that everybody's seeing, if that makes sense.
It does, and all of it's necessary. It sounds like, I'm just like thinking as you were sharing that, you kind of landed in spaces like YouTube and Google that, are known for their work in computers. And Davis, I'm curious about you. It seems like you were, because you kind of identify yourself as a biologist. And then the coding came afterwards, or was that something that you intended on from the forefront?
I always knew it was important. I mean, it's as you go through undergrad, everyone says this to you. Oh, you really should know how to code. You should know how to code. But when you don't have anyone actually assigning you a coding task, it's easy to just kind of brush it off and say, well, I mean, and it's hard to learn how to code when you don't have something to do with it. I mean, really, I have learned how to code by necessity. I've been given these data sets and given these lines of code, and my professor who I work for will just say, okay, figure this out. And I have to kind of reverse engineer it and go backwards and learn how to code kind of as necessity arises. And that's certainly not the best way to learn, especially because I still feel like I'm missing some of the fundamental concepts of computer structure and to be honest, I don't really know what a computer is. I just know that if I type this here and press enter, it'll do what I want it to do. And I listen to people talk about the lower level coding languages, like, the ones where you're physically manipulating the transistors inside the motherboard of the computer or whatever. And it just goes way over my head. But the people who know how to do that are the people making these substantial leaps in kind of automation and neuroscience and biology, because they can develop the next new device that everyone has sitting on their benchtop that automates a task that historically would have taken weeks. So I think if you understand now at this level the importance of coding, and you should, don't just take my word for it, just look around and see how ubiquitous it is. I would encourage you to really, really commit to learning the fundamentals and learning the basic, go on, like I think I heard Code Academy mentioned, go on Code Academy and learn, basically what is a coding language? What does it mean to type in a line of code and press enter? What does it mean to run code? What does it mean to, all these words you hear coding people throw around that go way over your head. I mean, it's as simple as Googling the terms and trying to use them, and somebody will correct you, and then you use them again. And but that kind of deep understanding of what you're doing with computers, I think would be really, really useful. Because like I said, I'm kind of like dipping my toes in coding whenever I need to. But for the most part, I stick to what I know because I don't really have the backgrounds required to understand exactly what I'm doing to the computers. I just know that I'm logically flowing through the sequence of steps that tends to yield me the results I want. But I'm not a very flexible coder. I can't just be given a bunch of code and figure out like the gist of it. Or if somebody writes code and they didn't put any comments, I usually have next to no idea what any of it means. And I have to go and Google every single command and function. And I'm sure this sentiment is shared, that's exhausting. And if you understand like more deeply what code is and how it's all structured, you can kind of circumvent those issues where you are staring at a bunch of lines of text and having no clue what it all means.
So
and this is a perfect time to start doing that.
Oh, no, Simone, go for it.
Okay, I was just gonna say that, yeah, reading other people's code can be really hard sometimes. And I wanted to add about the whole sort of not having the fundamentals. I think that is a problem often in college where, like you were saying, everyone's really encouraged to learn to code. You should learn, like, especially if you're in STEM, like, oh, it's like something you should do. But when you have all these difficult classes, like let's say you're a microbiology major, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to take an extra coding class. Oftentimes there'll be like a little coding snippet, shoehorned into your class where you have to, this homework assignment, you have to write a little piece of code. But if you don't know, if you don't have like an underlying understanding of what it means, it's like you're just going to forget, the week after you turn in the assignments, really, you didn't really learn anything. You just Googled it and typed it in, you know what I mean? So I think that's an important point.
I think it's really important. And actually it segues really well to a question that we have from one of our attendees, which I'll set up with my own question, but then transition to this one from Steve Bateman in our audience today. So the question is, what I think I hear both of you saying, but especially Davis for your earlier points. I mean, once again, lacking, I think I know what you mean about this sort of when you're lacking a schema or a foundational understanding of something, information that you pile on top of that, you can kind of fake it and pretend that you know what you're talking about, but ultimately, and you can do enough to get by, but you don't have that deeper understanding, the underlying understanding of like actually what's going on. Some of which we probably don't need to know, like, like you were saying about how a computer works, for example, but just basic coding structure and language and all the stuff, which I think Simone learned in his high school class, right? And his good teacher who really gave him, correct me if I'm wrong, Simone, that foundation. Is that safe to say? You kind of built that, oh, I basically understand what coding is.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it all comes down to those foundational building blocks of what a program is, and
Right.
kind of like Davis was saying, that as even if you don't know necessarily the code you're looking at, or you don't know exactly what to do, as long as if you can just build logical things that follow each other, it's just
Right.
like, right, your program is just instructions that you're giving the computer. If you can just
Right.
build a logical flow of instructions based on those building blocks that you learned, you can basically do anything, which is
And I
really
wanted
cool.
to add parenthetically for Davis, just so you get a chuckle out of this, I would actually encourage you to hop onto our, I'm sorry, Michelle, it's called the campus. Is that right? The game campus, where we have a lot of interactive activities.
Yeah, so on our acoe.org/hour of code website, it has our schedule, which features this panel and other panels that are happening through the week, but it also has a coding campus. So students who are interested in exploring, you can go ahead and, explore that campus, enter different activities, or even by grade band, and you'll get linked to a lot of coding games and activities that you can play, which is get a feel.
And it's those coding games that when I went on them, because I will admit to not having any sort of a real CS background, I actually, when I was helping kids, this was a couple of years ago, we were actually in person, which will date the event. We had all these kids come into our building at ACOE, and it was so fun. They were totally riveted by these various different games. But as I was helping them with them, kid maybe in 5th grade or something, I suddenly was like, oh, like I felt like I suddenly got it, like what a coding language is, about how all the stuff that you know how to do. Anyway, the point being, it's neat to see that those games, I think, do help to bring some of that schema to bear for young kids. Finally, let me transition to this question. Do you feel that schools understand how important it is to equip kids with CS skills? What advice would you give a school administrator about teaching CS in their school or district?
I can. Oh, you want to
I
start,
can
David?
I can answer because my answer is really short. I would say that don't shy away from these coding classes that are aimed towards like really young children. I mean, my mom is a 4th grade teacher, and I've listened to her kind of struggle through, okay, how do I explain fractions to somebody who's never done fractions before? And that level of detail you have to put into those lessons is still useful when you're an adult. I mean, if I'm really struggling with a fundamental concept of anything, I just Google, like, explain this to me like I'm 5. Like, what is a computer? And almost, every single time I do that, I get the answer I'm looking for, which is, I don't get the answer as some Reddit post where some people are being mean to each other about, oh, you don't know the blankety blank. You get, some carefully curated explanation by a teacher who knows how to explain things, and that's usually like invaluable. So don't shy away from it just because it's aimed towards like, little kids or teenagers. Usually that's where like the best teaching comes in, because they really have to be good teachers. Otherwise, kids aren't going to pay any attention.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of starting small, starting with those fundamentals is really important, and I think trying to do it in engaging ways, like I remember Mr. Morris was a super engaging teacher, um, and obviously that's not something that you can necessarily like easily teach a teacher how to do, but um, there are things that ways that lesson plans that you can. I remember when I was in high school, I did some teaching for kids. I would like I don't remember exactly how I got into this, but it was like a small tutoring group for like 5, 6, 7 kids or something. And I was teaching them like kind of like these fundamentals I'm talking about, which is like, if statements, for loops, all those little building blocks. And the way we taught them was there's these, I forget what they're called, but there's these little robots. They're like these spheres. They're probably called spheros or something. But and essentially you can control them with like a little visual programming language, kind of like Scratch, like on a phone. And I was that was just kind of like a really fun and engaging way to teach people. And I don't think that has to something like that has to be for kids, like Dave was saying. Like that's something obviously works great with kids, but even I think that would be really like I would probably still find that fun to this day, like to do. So
Uh-oh, I think we lost Davis. Hopefully he'll be able to zoom
He'll
back.
probably hop back on. Mhm.
Well, I think that's really, I was just pulling up while you were talking, Simone, that, in a recent meeting that I was a part of, they ranked by state, the percentage of high schools that actually offer computer science. And pretty much California is like, I would say in the lower 1/5 of the population. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of providing those educational opportunities for kids at high school, and even before high school. And so it's really powerful to hear that you had such a great experience learning computer science in Albany, in the county, but then also it really kind of purported your, in combination, with your own self-learning, purported your efforts, in pursuing, and landing in YouTube. So that's really cool. I was going to ask a little bit about like on a day-to-day, how does coding happen for you? You just like coding 24/7 while you're in the job, or like what is like the workflow like that, and what aspect of coding really fills in that workflow?
yeah, that's a great question. I think that's kind of like something that sort of mystifies like what is a you know software developer actually doing. And there's actually a large range. Like we're not coding all, or most of us aren't coding all day. That's not super sustainable. You're when you're coding sort of more complex tasks. You can only do it for so long before your brain just kind of stops working. Um, so it's a lot of it is about like self-monitoring, having these bouts of sort of, oh, I just had a great idea, like I'm gonna go and implement this now, and then okay, I spent a few hours working on that. I'm gonna do another aspect of my job, which might be things from email, like every job, emails, whatever. But something that I do a decent amount, which can be fun, can also be not so fun, is like design docs, which is just like technical documentation of what you're working on, because you might have a great understanding of the stuff you're working on or within your team, but if you need to share that with other people, it's something that you don't want just sitting in your head that you might forget about. It's good to write this stuff down, and being a good communicator is actually a really big part of being a good software developer, a good programmer, because it's not a one, in most cases not like a one-man effort. It's collaborative. So I think that's definitely like an underrated part of software development is you know collaboration and communication, and those soft skills that are sometimes lost on some people.
Yeah, that's
So
certainly.
we paid Simone to say that.
Yeah.
No, we didn't actually. We work a lot on college and career readiness, Simone, and so I think you're really helping frame some of the key issues of what you really need when you're in the workplace. And needless to say, the collaboration piece. I mean, how do you feel about the way that your K-12 education kind of did that? I'm sure there were times when it worked, but would you say that's an area of growth for most schools, high schools, or how do you feel that went? Did you have opportunities for meaningful collaboration with your classmates?
I think there was some stuff. I'm sure there could be. I think that's another thing that's like kind of hard to teach. Uh, like I remember there was like a debate in freshman year that was like collaboration, but I also remember that like group projects just kind of suck. Like just no matter when, college, high school, like it's always harder to work in a group because you might not have the same standards as everyone else in the group, or you might have different workflows, and it's challenging. So I guess I don't really know. I guess it's probably is something that's lacking, but at the same time, I don't really know what would help. It's kind of tricky.
Mhm. Sometimes you just have to experience it and you figure it through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you touched upon the soft skills piece and how communication is important. That's actually a theme that I think we've been hearing across the board with all of our sessions. Not only communicating with people, but really, kind of the thoughtfulness, when you're programming to communicate, the functionality of what you're trying to do. Um, would you have, and I don't know if it's too similar, but if there are students who are in the room who, would love to pursue a similar pathway as you have, pieces of advice.
Yeah, I have some stuff. I would say, never feel like you're underqualified or that you're not good enough. Like, no matter what state you're in now, like if you're passionate about computer science, like that's such a head start over some people. Some people are just in it for the money or just, maybe not necessarily doing it for the best reasons, but like if you want to do computer science and or even if you think you do, um, you can get there. Like don't like not everybody who's a software engineer is like brilliant, Stephen Hawking or whatever. Like you can like we've been talking about this whole time, it comes down to the fundamentals and it comes down to, yeah, as we just said, being a good like sometimes being a good communicator is like just as important as your engineering skills. Like, and part of that is also just being a good teammate and being a good coworker. Like nobody wants to work with someone who's mean or annoying or, being like a good person, being responsive and yeah, just being a good coworker is a huge part of it as well. Another thing I would say is like just don't give up. I've had, I guess I'll share a quick little story. Like my freshman year, my fall quarter, this was literally fall quarter. I didn't have a GPA. I didn't have anything in college yet, but I knew that how important internships are. But like to preface this, like yeah, getting in college, like in software engineering and in a lot of jobs, getting an internship really big because once you have experience, it's almost like you're there. Like getting another job once you have your first job is not nearly as hard as getting that first experience, right? So I knew that from the start, which is something to keep in mind for sure. So yeah, it was my freshman year, and I attended this conference, which was like an engineering conference, in hopes of networking and getting connections and hopefully leading to an internship. And basically, there's this room full of recruiters that you wait in a long line for, and then you walk in and you like mingle and then try to make something happen, get an offer or an interview or anything. And the first person I walked up to basically just laughed at me when I told him I was a freshman. I didn't have a GPA. He was like, "Yeah, like, I have no, which is kind of valid. Like I could have just been terrible. How is he supposed to like, it's hard to get, like what I'm saying is hard to get your foot in the door when you don't have experience. But I didn't let that stop. Like you're supposed to talk to one recruiter and then leave the room. So I talked to him and I started leaving, but I was like, no, you know what? I walked back in and I talked to someone else, and they actually gave me an interview the next day, signed me up for an interview. So I went to that interview and I got an offer for that company. And I didn't really want to work at that company, but I used that offer to talk to another recruiter, and basically use that to negotiate and get an offer at the company I didn't want to work at, which was Qualcomm. And that sort of kickstarted my career, right? I got that offer. The next summer, that experience probably made me look better than other applicants for Google, which got me that Google job and so on and so forth. I kept using my previous experience to get me my new experience. So I think that, if I had just given up after that first recruiter, like who knows if I would have my job today, which is, kind of crazy.
I love that story. That's really helpful. Just the perseverance and a little bit of non-rule following, I guess, where you talk to a second recruiter. But
Yeah.
that's
I
really,
mean, I would just add, Michelle, I mean,
yeah.
obviously, great advice for any person going into any field. That's really universal advice, Simone, really valuable. because you could apply that to pretty much any field experience, right? It would be the same basic dynamic, getting that first position and then building on that. And so thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. And I was just going to add, I've heard it said lots of times, with my friends and family, like a lot of it is what you know, but a lot more of it is who you know. And so being able to build up connections and networking is really important. And that's kind of part of the impetus for, wanting us to get people together and have conversations about computer science. There's so many like what Davis is doing. I never thought of being able to combine like neurobiology or neuroscience, with computer programming, and he's doing that. And you too, kind of pushing the work forward with, YouTube is like this phenomena that everybody accesses it for constructing knowledge and learning, right? And so it's just kind of neat to be able to hear the work that each of you do that involves coding as a through line, and a connectivity piece and a common piece. But you also have these different applications of the work.
For sure.
Just want to take a moment because I know that I feel like I've been talking a lot, but it's great to hear from you, Simone. If there's any other questions from the audience, or Ben, do you have anything top of mind?
No, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think there's been a lot of valuable stuff. Does anybody, let's see if anybody pops anything into the Q&A here. We'll keep an eye on that.
But Simone, just another question I'm just asking because, seems like the golden ticket was kind of, an internship. Is that usually a route that students tend to take in college? Is like you start studying and taking your classes and you try to get yourself into an internship opportunity? And then also, do all companies usually offer something like that? Or is it just, select companies or big companies?
Yeah, there's many different paths. So you don't necessarily need an internship. I know people who didn't have internships and were able to secure jobs, but it's just like getting that experience in college is just gonna, doing anything to put you ahead of the other people in your pool, right, is gonna help. Even just getting a college degree, that's gonna make you stand out amongst people who didn't get a college degree. And I'm not saying necessarily have to get a job in computer science, but it's going to help a lot. And, you're going to learn obviously incredible things in college, but I like in terms of how to get internship or who's offering internship, like, it's not just the big companies, there's small companies, there's a wide range, but it definitely is difficult. So I would say like this idea of networking and talking to people and attend career fairs, join, career based clubs in college, and all these things will, just hopefully you want to just increase your chances of finding opportunities to talk to recruiters, talk to people who are working at these jobs that could potentially offer you positions. Like, you can just cold apply to a million places and it might work, but it's often more likely that if you talk to someone, that human to human contact is more likely to result in something good happening for you. And I can maybe drop links to some like Google related resources about like internships and
yeah, maybe you can share that with Michelle and she can push that out to folks. Hey, I have a final question. I know we're probably running up against our time here, but I actually it occurred to me, Simone, I wonder if I could kind of test out an idea that I think is connected to what you were saying earlier. Well, it certainly seems reasonable that some people, as they head into computer science, might go in a very, I don't want to say technical route, but really just focus on the coding, right? And build and engineering and just pretty narrowly going there. And that maybe not taking, if they're in a bachelor's program, maybe not taking a range of courses, and maybe they're not even in a bachelor's program, which again, I know for some people is great. It's fine. It works fine. But would you say that everything else equal, having a solid, I'll just hearken to my own interest in the humanities or whatever and say a liberal arts education would in fact help you in a variety of maybe not only building some of those soft skills that we were talking about, which you can pick up in all different kind of courses, but even just generally appreciating the world around you. I mean, I'm not saying anything people probably wouldn't agree with, but do you know what I'm saying? That the better your sort of foundational education, the better you're probably going to be, even if you're a programmer. And so would you say that's right, that maybe not a narrow focus on just coding would actually help you in the long run?
No, definitely. And like, I think that definitely ties into what we were saying earlier, where it's not all about coding. It's about this, your soft skills is about your overall ability to be a good teammate and produce good work. And I think a lot of that does come from, taking classes in other areas outside of STEM and, trying to broaden your horizons. Because like I said, I'm a lot of times I'm writing documents at work. I'm needing to communicate clearly, and I'm sure my writing classes, both in high school and college, helped with that. Um, being, not every software job necessarily you need to be a strong writer, but it could only help. And yeah, and then also when it comes to interviewing, getting talking to a recruiter and getting an interview is just the first step, right? You have to complete the interview, and part of that is going to be presenting yourself well and seem like a capable and confident person. And unfortunately, in computer science, it's also being technically adept. Like, computer science interviews are often basically like you have to solve a coding question during the interview, which is challenging, but it's something that you can study for. So once again, what I've kind of been saying, I guess, for the past little bit is like doing what you can to sort of put yourself above the people in your group. It's not like it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a competition necessarily, but just standing out is super important. So if you present yourself confidently, if you're able to communicate clearly, that's gonna hopefully make you stand out against people who maybe didn't, only focused on coding and only, were on their laptops coding all day and didn't kind of experience life or, get these broader horizons.
And I don't want to speak for Davis, but when he was kind of sharing about his application of coding into neuroscience, that also was a different avenue that was kind of thinking differently in some ways, applying coding for the purpose of, pushing forward whatever his content area was, which was, science. And so I wanted to share that I put into the Q&A box. So hopefully folks can see it. If not, we'll definitely publish those resources that you shared, Simone. I don't know if you want to explain what they are at all. Oops,
I think there's a few things. Some of them are like more younger, like high school students. Some of them are more older, university, and some. I think it's just like general resources. I'm. Let me see. It looks like the first one is about sort of what opportunities Google has for high school, college, and post college. The second one is sort of for underrepresented communities, encouraging them to get into coding. And the third one, it looks like, is like a summer camp or like summer program type thing. So there's a few resources there.
Thank you for sharing those. I do have one more question. You're fresh graduated with your computer science degree. You are young, you're living in the city with the view of the bridge, and you're at YouTube. What's next for Simone?
That's an excellent question. I definitely see a lot of career growth opportunity at Google. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon. I have a great team, a really supportive manager, like people that I enjoy working with, and I work on cool stuff. Sometimes it can be tedious. Sometimes it can be stuff you don't want to work on, of course. But when I have all these like good support systems, it makes it like very difficult to want to leave, right? So I'm definitely wanting to stay. Like, I think I can progress in my career, get promoted, hopefully, continue to learn new things. And, I imagine that unless like some sort of incredible opportunity comes by my way, I will likely, before I leave the company, I'll probably just switch to a different team. Like at larger companies, it's usually, depends on the company, but it's often not too hard to switch teams. So, if things get stale at your old team and you want to sort of explore a new area, instead of leaving the company as a whole, like I can just find something else internally to work on, which I expect I'm likely to do before leaving. I see a potential career growth path, and I don't want to necessarily give that up for something that's more uncertainty.
Totally happy for you, Ben. I don't know if you want to say a few words, but just appreciate everyone for being here in this webinar, and just Simone very much for your perspective and your advice and your encouragement, honestly, to all of us who are here in the room.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in and thank you again as well, Simone. I feel like in a short amount of time, we surfaced a lot of really valuable ideas. So thank you so much for that. Again, stuff that I think is somewhat specific and technical, but also just kind of really valuable, broader ideas that I think I'm just feeling enriched from this conversation. So really glad we were able to have it. And I'll say thanks again, and say hi to your folks and your brother.
Yeah.
All this, your
They had
six.
a Theo and Nate for me.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'm just going to go ahead and remind folks that there's still some additional panels. That another one that's happening this evening at 5:15. It's a panel of BIPOC coders. And then tomorrow we have our final day of sessions. So check out the schedule at acoe.org/hour of code, and hopefully take time to play a little bit around some of the Coding Campus activities. And thank you once again to everyone who's here, and we look forward to more coding together. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.